Hello, Neil from Magpie Brewing. So we're here today. We're going to have a look at the comparison on the new Hydrom electronic hydrometer from Keg King Australia, the German made Hydrom, and I compared it in a fermentation with the Tilt Pro. Now the Tilt Pro has been around for a while, but both units are quite large, and I'll put them both into the Smashing Magpie brew that I done as a ferment. As happened, it's good really, because it was quite a vigorous fermentation. I'd cubed the all-grain brew that I done, so I had just under 47 litres of wort, and I introduced that to 3 packets, 11 gram packets of Verdant IPA from Lullerman yeast, which I could have got away with 2 packets, to be quite honest. So the original gravity was 1.045, and I thought 47 litres, when you go, like some people say 1 gram per litre, but the Verdant IPA, as we know, those that use it, is a very, very flocculent yeast. I think that's how you say it. Anyway, she took off, and took off in a big way. So I've got a video there, and I got a couple of pictures there too that show the depth and the density of the actual beginning of the fermentation, which was after 2 or 3 days, and it's quite thick. And I had to put the fermentation under 7 psi to calm it down. Otherwise I would have had to blow tube it off, and I don't like to do that. So it made the comparison quite interesting, because it was probably the most to put it in such a fermentation really tries these electronic hydrometers out. They tend to float and switch and you know, go up and down, and that's in my experience, until the fermentation settles down a little bit. And then when you add a little bit of pressure, well, you're putting another element into the fermentation, so the electronic hydrometers tend to take that into account, and it does have some effect to them. I will get on the computer shortly, and we'll have a look at some graphs of how it went. And I have done a look. It's a pretty rough Excel spreadsheet, but the spreadsheet actually shows the nearness or the comparison side by side in quite an easy chart. It's only a simple chart. The original gravity readings to what the 2 electronic hydrometers were doing. But at the end of the day, and at the end of the ferment, there was some noticeable differences, and some things that we could see, you know, where things were different, and what each hydrometer done. So we'll have a look at those also. But first off, I'll get on the computer and we'll bring up Brewer's Friend, and we'll have a look at the graphs, and then I'll chuck the Excel spreadsheet up and we'll have a look at that, and then we'll talk about we'll just talk about the 2 hydrometers. Hello, so we're on the computer now and we'll just bring up our first graph. So we'll bring up the Hydrom first up. And there we have it. So here's a graph from the Hydrom through the fermentation. So when I first put the Hydrom in, and also the Tilt Pro, as you'll see, they both registered 1.044. The actual gravity of the wort was 1.045. The Hydrom actually, once it settled down, picked that up, so it went to 1.45. Then when fermentation really began, and this was quite a vigorous fermentation, and you'll see these same things elevated, the Hydrom sort of went a bit crazy with it, got a lot of corrosion on it, and it got stuck. So it got stuck under my tubing in the PET fermenter. So when I come out, I unstuck it and then I took pressure out, so it dropped its pressure, but then it soon regathered to where it was. And then we just got into our fermentation. The spiking is normal in most fermentations. A lot of these spikes downwards a little bit and upwards are because I was taking samples of OG for a comparison chart. But the Hydrom was pretty consistent throughout the process. Now what happened here, we got stuck again. What happened, I'd taken a sample here, and when I put it back under the pressure, or I let it gather its pressure, it got stuck under the tubing. I give it a bit of a shake and it come up and it got going and it wasn't too bad. Then here I took a sample and it dropped, and it had by this stage, because we're a week in here, it had a lot of krausen on top, a lot. So I give the fermenter a bit of a shake and it actually got rid of it and it brought itself back up. Here is, I think what I'd done, because I took a sample, I'm pretty sure what happened is I put 10 psi back in with CO2 and it's pushed it downwards, I think. And here we have what the Hydrom has seen as the end of the fermentation. So down here, it got down to its lowest point there. And when I started my cold crash, it got down to, I can't expand it anymore, the graph, but it actually got down to 10.009. When I started the cold crash, the Hydrom went up. The gravity went up. I still don't know why, but the gravity went up. So I've got it in another brew at the moment, and I'll keep an eye on that. But as you can see, I cold crash fairly quick when I do cold crash, and I think it was relative to the temperature of the beer and also the pressure, because the beer starts to become carbonated because it's starting to chew up that 10 psi that I have in it as it's getting colder, so it's actually starting to carbonate. So whether that's the reason for that, I don't know, because as you'll see, I'll bring up the graph for the Tilt Pro. So this is the same beer, same fermentation. It's my Tilt Pro. So as you can see on this graph, the Tilt Pro went the same way. So it's got its little drops here, but the changes in pressure didn't seem to be as great with the Tilt Pro. That was a big drop. I had that same big drop. That's when I shook it. Then we got to here. Little drop in pressure. I took another sample there, I'd say. Then we got up.
And then the Tilt Pro got down to 1.014, 1.013, and that's where it stayed. So it plateaued out there. Again, it had a lot of corrosion there, and you can see on the cold crash, just before the cold crash, the big dip, or it's a dip, it's not as large as the dip was on the Hydrom. That's where I put it under pressure again. It dropped a bit, but then it just stayed. So the fermentation, the fermentation, even though it was pretty much done on the cold crash, the change in temperature and carbonation didn't seem to worry the Tilt Pro. So that's something to be mindful of, really. It had a lot of krausen on it, the same as the Hydrom had a lot of krausen. They both done pretty much the same thing. I'll bring an Excel spreadsheet up in a moment, and you'll see that especially towards the end, the Hydrom was a lot more accurate than the Tilt Pro. So I'll just bring that Excel spreadsheet up. Okay, so it's a pretty basic spreadsheet, but here's our Excel spreadsheet that I've done. So as you can see, the yellow is the actual gravity, the green represents the Tilt Pro, and the red represents the Hydrom. Only done one gravity reading a day. I think I missed a day there by the look of it. Or I might not. But anyway, we only done readings. I wasn't going to do a reading every 4 hours, and these Hydrom figures and Tilt Pro are taken about every 4 hours. So as you can see, it was 1.45. They both show 1.44. The Hydrom gathered in the 1.45. But the important thing to note, I think, is as you plot down, you can see that both of the hydrometers started the fermentation at the same time. The Tilt Pro, up until a point here, was dropping at a little quicker rate than the Hydrom, but then all of a sudden the Hydrom really took off. Now it got stuck here, and this is when it started forming. It was very high krausen, so the krausen in this early stage, and this is where I put it under pressure, seemed to affect initially the Hydrom more than the Tilt Pro, which is interesting. But then when we get back into it, the Hydrom just comes down steady, and throughout the main part of the fermentation, really, they match. Then we come down, and you can see the Tilt Pro now has pretty much bottomed out. It's bobbled about here. A lot of these bobbles are me taking samples and the pressure releasing and putting it back under pressure. But the Hydrom kept dropping slightly towards the end of the fermentation. So it got down to 10.08 at one brief stage there, but 10.9 was what it got down to, and that was the actual bottom out of the fermentation, was 10.09. And then you see the Hydrom here. I just showed how the cold crash, it got up to 10.22 or something. So the cold crash, as I say, it affected it for some reason, which I don't know why. I've got it in another fermentation at the present time, so I'll just see if it does it again. But I'm sort of thinking that as the beer becomes slightly carbonated on the cold crash, the Hydrom was more affected than the Tilt Pro. But the Tilt Pro has been doing this to me the last few brews. It's been getting to 3 or 4 points off what the reading should be and just bottoming out. But you can tell that the fermentation is over because it flattens out. So even though it's higher, the fermentation's over. So we'll get back to the video.
So by the end of the fermentation, the Hydrom was well in front in my opinion, because it actually kept going. It didn't slow down. It sort of picked it up, and it was very, very close to the mark. So the lowest it showed was 1.008, but the final fermentation gravity was 1.009. The Tilt Pro stopped and stalled at 1.013, and it does that. It's done that on a few brews that I've had it in now, and it does that. But then the other thing that we've seen with the Hydrom, and it's going to be interesting, I've dropped it straight into another brew. So the interesting thing with the Hydrom was when I cold crashed, the Hydrom actually, the gravity went up. The other differences were, I think the Hydrom was smoother in showing the fermentation pressure process. So the Hydrom seemed to go with the flow, so to speak, whereas the Tilt Pro sort of got to a point and then stopped. Both, I didn't take photos really, but because of the vigorous fermentation, when I got them out of the fermenter, both the Hydrom and the Tilt had a lot of Krausien yeast on top. I think this affected the Tilt Pro more than the Hydrom. The Hydrom is bigger than the Tilt Pro. So when we look at pros, cons, what do you do, what do you buy, do you even want to buy one? You know, like, do you need an electronic device in your work to tell you how your fermentation's going? Do you get it just because you like to watch your fermentation? Me, I'm a geek. I love them. I love the different types. That is why I've built an ice spindle. It's just another offside to me. But also I like to see with different yeasts and different beer styles, when the fermentation starts, I like to note the temperature of my fermentation, and I like to follow it through. So the middle range is when the fermentation is quite vigorous. I don't worry about it too much because I know there's going to be ebbs and flows. That's the way it goes. I know the Krausien, when the fermentation settles down, I know the Krausien is going to get onto the top of no matter what device you have. You're going to get some Krausien on it. So if you're looking for accuracy, you don't go electronic, you go physical. You get a hydrometer, you take a sample, that's going to be accurate. But the electronic devices give you a great look at what's going on, especially if you're inside stainless steel. Not so much the PET fermenters, but the stainless steel ones where you can't see what's going on. You don't know what the Krausien's doing, you don't know what's going on in there, and so you can get a look at it. And I haven't put the Hydrom in a stainless steel yet, mainly because I have cooling coils in my stainless steel fermenters, and the Hydrom and the Tilt Pro, which I haven't used in one neither, tend to get caught up in the cooling coils. So I might, just for interest's sake, at some stage drop them both in a stainless steel within the fridge. I did when I tested, and I read them both. They both come out, so it was. But I have strong Wi-Fi in the brew room, I will admit. I've got a strong Wi-Fi system. So at the end of the day, the pros and the cons, I don't know, pros and cons, ifs and buts. The advantage of the Tilt Pro is it's an established hydrometer in the industry. You can change your timing on the fly. So if you want to wait until your fermentation starts, you whack it on 15 minutes. Then when your fermentation starts, you might want to strike it out to an hour. Then as your fermentation is weakening and starting to dribble, you might want to put it back to 15 minutes to assist in your dry hops, or when you want to dry hop, or etc, etc. The definite cons of the Tilt Pro are price. It's quite expensive. The Tilt Pro especially is expensive. I think I paid $350 or $360 for mine, plus postage. And it hasn't got rechargeable batteries. And honestly, I don't know how to do a firmware upgrade on it, if it ever needed one. Other than that, and when you do replace the batteries, I know in my smaller ones, I've changed batteries and they never seem to last as long. And the tubing is, you need rubber gloves. So we move on to the Hydrom pros and cons, ifs and buts. One is the price comparison. At $100 plus postage, and that's the current price, I believe. That's what I paid. I paid $99 and postage. It's a good value. I built a spindle and the bits and pieces cost me $68. Then I had to solder it all up, which was a bit of fun for me, but I mean, not everyone likes doing that sort of stuff. Then you've got to do all the calibrations via GitHub. Then you put it in the brew, and so that's the ice spindle. Whereas the Hydrom comes, you switch it on, press the button, takes you into a very, very easy setup layout. And I should have mentioned, the tilt is just basically put it in and it goes, and that is a pro. Put it in, it starts, Bluetooth. The Hydrom is Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. I haven't put it on Bluetooth due to, I think, the battery usage, but it was very easy to set up. I set it up in Brewer's Friend and I set it up with Brewfather. Easy. Very easy. When it first went in, it used about a fifth of its power, 20%, but after that, for the next 14 days at 15 minutes and 30, it only used another 6%, 7% of its battery. So battery usage is really, really good. So that's a pro. It was quite accurate, especially at the start and the finish, and through the middle it did get stuck there under the tube there for a while. It took me a day to notice that and give it a bit of a shake and get it out, but it was quite accurate. The measurements were quite accurate, so that was good. It's big, so some people may have a problem with the size of it. I don't. I think it'll go in most fermenters quite easily. The support, I will mention the support from the developer is absolutely excellent. If you email a developer with a query, a question, you can't understand the setup instructions, even if you have an idea, this man will accommodate. He answers quickly, he answers efficiently, very, very good, very knowledgeable. So and the packaging is quite robust. I had no water get in. It sealed well. Yeah, I could go on and on, I suppose. My preference at this stage would be I will buy a Hydrom. And the reason I will buy it is price and usage. So, first of all, you can buy 2-3 Hydroms for one Tilt Pro. They do the same job. They are both, well, I thought the Hydrom was slightly more accurate in the fermentation than the Tilt Pro. They were both easy to clean. You can recharge the battery, so with the rechargeable battery of the Hydrom. I've got it in a second brew at the moment, and I reckon I get 3 or 4 brews out of it. And that's at 15-minute intervals, which I'll space out on the third time I use it, because I'm going to run that battery flat. So the third time I use it, I'm going to go out to, say, 45 minutes. It's not cloud reliant, so you don't need the cloud. You don't need a software program, and it's as adaptable as the Tilt in whatever software programs you want to use it in. So for mine, it'd be a Hydrom.